She means about as much as the curtains. Duke Adrian Viermont said it while laughing. Not loudly. Not cruelly. Just carelessly. Which somehow made it worse. Because intentional cruelty at least required effort. Carelessness simply meant someone stopped noticing damage entirely. The words drifted through the library while rain tapped softly against tall windows outside. Across from him, Lucien Viermont lowered his wine glass slowly. What? Adrian continued signing correspondence. My wife. Lucien stared. Adrian did not notice. She's part of the house now. A pause. Comfortable. Reliable. He shrugged casually. I care for her like I care for the curtains. Silence. Absolute silence. Lucien blinked once. Twice. Then very carefully. You compared your wife to furniture. No. Adrian looked up. I compared her to curtains. Wonderful. Lucien looked horrified. That fixes everything. Adrian frowned slightly. What? Oh, absolutely nothing. His brother leaned back slowly. Except perhaps the complete collapse of your marriage. Adrian sighed. You're being dramatic. No. Lucien stared directly at him. I'm being deeply concerned. Adrian waved him away dismissively. Because in his mind, the statement made perfect sense. Rosalie was dependable. Steady. Always there. Always warm. Always part of life. What exactly was offensive about that? Unfortunately, there was one small problem. Someone stood outside the partially open library door and had heard everything. Rosalie Viermont remained still in the hallway. Not moving. Not breathing. Nothing. In her hands sat a silver tea tray carrying Adrian's evening coffee. Steam still curled upward gently. For several long seconds, she simply stared at the doorway, then lowered her eyes. Interesting. Very interesting. Because she didn't feel angry immediately. She felt tired. Deeply tired. The kind of tired arriving after carrying invisible weight too long. 3 years of marriage passed through her mind strangely. Not big moments. Small ones. Always small ones. Adrian forgetting anniversaries, but remembering shipping schedules perfectly. Adrian working through dinner because he assumed she'd understand. Adrian saying things like, Rosalie will handle it. Rosalie knows where everything is. Rosalie remembers these things. Not cruel. Never cruel. Just automatic. Like breathing. Like furniture. Like curtains. Slowly she turned and walked away. No tears. No dramatic reactions. Just silence. 3 years earlier, Adrian Viermont fell in love with Rosalie Ashbourne because she changed rooms without trying. Not physically. Emotionally. The first time he visited her father's bookstore, he arrived exhausted after miserable business negotiations. Cold weather. Rain. Terrible day. Terrible mood. He remembered walking inside expecting silence. Instead, Rosalie sat on the floor surrounded by books, arguing passionately with an elderly customer. You cannot possibly rank poetry beneath history. The old man looked offended. History built civilization. Yes. Rosalie pointed dramatically. And poetry made civilization worth surviving. Adrian remembered staring. Not because she was beautiful, though she was. Not because she was clever, though she certainly was. Because somehow the entire room felt warmer around her. Lighter. Like someone quietly carrying sunlight. He returned the next week. Then again. Then again. Eventually, he stopped pretending books were the reason. Marriage happened quickly afterward. And for a while, everything felt easy. Rosalie laughed often. Adrian smiled more. Servants whispered that Viermont Hall finally felt alive. Then work expanded. Responsibilities grew. Pressure arrived. Months became years. And slowly Adrian stopped noticing all the things Rosalie carried around him. Not because he stopped loving her. Because he became accustomed to her. Dangerously accustomed. Like people becoming so used to breathing, they forget air matters. The next morning, Adrian noticed something strange immediately. Breakfast arrived wrong. Not bad. Wrong. The coffee tasted weaker. The flowers on the table looked uneven. The morning correspondence sat stacked incorrectly. Mrs. Fenwick entered carrying additional tea. Adrian frowned. Where's Rosalie? Mrs. Fenwick blinked. At breakfast? Yes. She isn't here. Silence. What do you mean? She left early. Left where? Mrs. Fenwick adjusted her sleeves calmly. She didn't say. Strange. Very strange. Rosalie always left notes. Always. Adrian pushed aside the feeling. Because surely she visited town. Or the gardens. Or somewhere equally ordinary. Unfortunately, ordinary continued disappearing. By afternoon, several servants looked nervous. By evening, Adrian looked irritated. By night, he looked confused. Because things kept going wrong. Small things. Ridiculous things. Yet increasingly irritating things. Dinner arrived missing ingredients. Guest schedules overlapped. Letters remained unanswered. A carriage appointment vanished entirely. What is happening? Adrian demanded. Mrs. Fenwick stared at him, long enough to become uncomfortable. Then, Her Grace handled those things. Silence. What things? Mrs. Fenwick looked genuinely surprised. All of them. 2 days later, the Eastern tenant manager arrived unexpectedly furious. Apparently, winter supply shipments had become disorganized. 3 servants argued over household schedules. Half the guest rooms prepared incorrectly. Adrian stood in his study surrounded by paperwork, feeling increasingly betrayed by reality itself. Because suddenly every invisible system around him looked broken. How? He demanded. Lucian sat nearby drinking tea with suspicious enjoyment. How what? How did all this happen? Lucian stared, then slowly lowered his cup. Oh no. What? You really don't know. Adrian frowned. Know what? His brother looked somewhere between pitying and amazed, then stood, walked toward the study doors, opened them, and gestured outside. Come. Confused and irritated, Adrian followed. They moved through hallways quietly, past kitchens, past servant corridors, past household offices, until eventually Lucian stopped. Watch. Adrian frowned. Watch what? Silence. Then slowly, he began noticing things. Servants checking handwritten lists. Gardeners reading instructions. Housekeepers carrying schedules. Small notes everywhere. Rosalie's handwriting. Rosalie's organization. Rosalie's systems. Rosalie's work. Rosalie. 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 Rosalie everywhere. Like invisible threads holding the entire house together. And suddenly Adrian remembered his own words. She's part of the house. No, not part of it. The thing holding it together. Then Mrs. Fenwick approached quietly, holding a folded envelope. For you. Adrian took it immediately, recognized Rosalie's handwriting instantly. And suddenly, for reasons he couldn't explain, his chest tightened. Adrian, you compare me to curtains. Interesting choice. Because curtains decorate rooms. But they also leave when removed. I've gone to stay with my aunt for a while. Vermont Hall should function perfectly without furniture. After all, furniture isn't necessary, right? Rosalie. Silence swallowed the hallway. Absolute silence. Then slowly, for the first time since making the joke, the Duke began understanding exactly what had left his house. And it wasn't furniture at all. For the first 4 days after reading Rosalie's letter, Adrian remained irritated. Not devastated. Not heartbroken. Irritated. Because surely this had become unnecessarily dramatic. A comment. One foolish comment. People survived worse things in marriages. People argued. People apologized. People moved forward. That was how life worked, wasn't it? Unfortunately, Vermont Hall disagreed. Because the house itself seemed determined to prove him wrong. The first disaster arrived during the annual winter charity dinner. 40 guests. 3 ministers. 2 merchants. 1 bishop. An event Rosalie normally organized effortlessly. Adrian assumed things would proceed perfectly. Then 12 guests arrived on the wrong day. The flower arrangements had been sent to another estate entirely. Half the musicians never received payment confirmation. And somehow the kitchen prepared fish for guests specifically requesting meat. Chaos. Absolute chaos. Adrian stood in the center of the entrance hall, watching servants run in every direction. What happened? He demanded. Mrs. Fenwick looked at him, long enough to become deeply uncomfortable. Her Grace normally creates contingency plans. Silence. Contingency plans? For contingency plans. Another silence. Good Lord. Then things became worse. Because Adrian started noticing Rosalie everywhere. Not physically. In absence. The east hallway looked darker because she changed flowers every Tuesday. The library felt wrong because books remained untouched instead of mysteriously reorganized. Dinner felt painfully quiet. Not because nobody spoke. Because nobody laughed. Rosalie laughed. Constantly. At strange things. Ridiculous things. Once she laughed for nearly 10 minutes because Adrian accidentally frightened himself with his own reflection in a dark window. It was late, he defended. You challenged your reflection to explain itself. It looked suspicious. It looked like you. And now Adrian sat in the same library remembering that conversation while staring at an untouched cup of coffee. Interesting. Very interesting. Because suddenly he couldn't remember the last time he actually looked at his wife. Not past her. Not assumed her. Looked at her. 3 weeks later, Lucien entered the study. Stopped. Then stared. Oh no. Adrian frowned. What? You've reached the tragic stage. What tragic stage? Lucien sat down. The remembering stage. Silence. Adrian looked back toward paperwork. I am working. No. Lucien pointed. You've been staring at the same page for 20 minutes. A pause. And smiling. Adrian froze. Smiling? Absolutely impossible. Lucien leaned back. You know what's happening? No. You miss her. Adrian sighed. No. Silence. Then. Yes. Because denying it had become ridiculous. He missed her voice drifting through hallways. He missed finding strange notes inside books. He missed her interrupting serious moments with absurd observations. He missed sunlight appearing inside rooms simply because she entered them. He missed her. Not the schedules. Not the systems. Her. Specifically her. And suddenly Adrian remembered something horrifying. 3 years earlier he fell in love with Rosalie because she made spaces warmer. Then somewhere along the way, he stopped noticing the warmth because he assumed it would remain forever. 2 days later Adrian left for the countryside. Not with flowers. Not with jewelry. Not with dramatic speeches prepared carefully beforehand. Because for perhaps the first time in his life, he suspected honesty might work better. Rosalie's aunt lived near a lake surrounded by rolling green fields and apple trees. Small, peaceful, warm, the complete opposite of Vermont Hall. Adrian found Rosalie near the gardens. Of course, she sat beneath a tree reading while 2 children nearby chased each other through the grass. Chestnut hair loose around her shoulders. Pale blue dress. Sunlight across her face. She looked up, saw him, went still, then closed her book quietly. You found me. Yes. Silence stretched between them. Long. Complicated. Rosalie stood slowly. You look tired. Not why are you here? Not leave. Just concern. Always concern. Adrian suddenly hated himself slightly. Because even now, even after everything, she looked at him kindly. I owe you an apology. Rosalie crossed her arms. Yes. No rescue. No softening. Good. He deserved that. Adrian moved closer. I thought I appreciated you. Silence. But I appreciated certainty. A pause. I appreciated believing you would always be there. Rosalie watched him quietly. And I became so used to you carrying everything, he continued softly, that I forgot to see the person carrying it. The breeze moved through the trees around them. I remembered after you left. Another step. The flowers. Another. The laughter. Another. The sunlight. Rosalie blinked. The sunlight. Adrian looked directly at her. You changed rooms. Silence. From the day I met you. Her expression softened slightly. Because she remembered. The bookstore. The rain. The arguments over poetry. Everything. I spent weeks thinking I missed what you did for me. Adrian admitted quietly. But I was wrong. Rosalie remained still. I missed you. Simple. Honest. Nothing polished. Nothing dramatic. Just truth. You hurt me, she said quietly. I know. You made me feel useful instead of loved. The words landed hard. Because yes, that was exactly what happened. Adrian stepped closer carefully. You were never furniture. A pause. You were the home. Silence. Real silence. Then Rosalie looked away briefly. Toward the lake. Toward the children laughing nearby. Then back at him. What changes if I come back? Now do you love me? Now will you apologize? Reality. Adrian answered immediately. You stop carrying everything alone. A pause. And I start noticing before losing you becomes necessary. Rosalie studied him for several seconds. Searching. Not for perfection. For truth. Finally, a smile touched her face. Small. Warm. Real. You finally looked. Relief hit Adrian so suddenly he nearly laughed. Instead, Rosalie stepped forward. Placed her hand gently in his. Months later Vermont Hall changed. Not because Rosalie returned and resumed carrying the world. Because Adrian started carrying pieces of it too. And he never again compared the woman he loved to objects inside rooms. Because he finally learned something simple. Furniture fills houses. People fill lives.